Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Urban Legends video. Thank you as always for your suggestions. This one is a very fascinating urban legend. I remember hearing about this one years and years back, and just coming across it today based on one of your suggestions, it reminded me of how fascinating this particular urban legend was and pretty much remains to this day. By the way, please let me know if there's still sounds like staticky noise coming through my microphone or any other kind of noise. Please let me know because maybe my microphone is going on the fritz. I listened to it and it seems fine to me, but if anyone else hears it, and several people pointed out, then I have one on standby on Amazon and I'll have it ordered immediately. So, in any case, in this case, this particular urban legend, this one has been around for a good number of years. It started, in fact, in the early 1800s, to give you an exact idea. It's no longer around now, so this is one urban legend that you can put, and no pun intended, but you can put a nail in the coffin, because those coffins are no longer there. And what I'm talking about are the Moving Coffins of Barbados, the urban legend tied to them. Very fascinating stuff. Some of you may have heard of this particular urban legend, some may have not. So those of you that have not, this is a very interesting tale that to this day has mystified many people as to why it happened. So again, this happened in around the early 1800s, and it had to do with some coffins that would inexplicably be found each time the vault was opened to add another member of the family into a new coffin. Each time that happened, it was found that the previous coffins were completely moved around. Freaky stuff. We're talking about coffins that probably weigh a good 100+ pounds each, maybe several hundred pounds depending on the material, but there they were, always found in disarray. So let's go back to the beginning. This happened in Barbados. Barbados is a place that's a little bit past Cuba, but a little bit on top before South America, so it's somewhere in that area. And in this case, it's situated in a town, or in about maybe 7 miles away from a town called Bridgetown. There was a family there that went by the last name Chase, the Chase family. They have had apparently a good wealth, or they had some kind of prominent status, enough to the point that whenever anybody was going to die within that family, they already had a very large vault, one containing both a top level and then an underground level specifically for their family. That goes to show the type of wealth that this family had, because no doubt others were either probably cremated or others just placed in simple coffins. Not for this family. This family, anytime somebody died, it was considered a major deal, and their death would be remembered, at least according to them, by making sure that they had a grand vault to place it in. And in fact, you'll see pictures of that vault here. And the very first vault, or the very first coffin that went inside that vault, happened in July 1807. It was for Miss Thomasina Goddard, and she was simply placed into a wooden coffin. But about next year, on 1808, the 2-year-old daughter named Marianne Chase died. No reasons have been explained as to why she died, but at 2 years old she died, and so she was also placed in a coffin, this time alongside the coffin of Thomasina Goddard. Now, a couple of years later, one of the older sisters, who went by the name who went by the name Dorcas, Dorcas, that's at least how hopefully it's said, Dorcas Chase, she died, and she was also placed in the vault. This happened in 1812, so about 5 years later from the very first coffin. There are tales apparently that Dorcas was not very happy about her situation. She had some kind of bad relationship with her father. It was to the point that she starved herself, probably out of some kind of self-punishment or to teach a lesson to others, who knows. But in any case, she starved herself and she died. But yet a year later from that, her father, who went by the name of Thomas Chase, the patriarch of the family, also died. In fact, he died a couple of weeks later? So my apologies, it was actually within that same year in 1812 that he died. Now here's where the tale becomes very interesting, and it could lead to speculation that this was something tied to his death, because when he was placed in a coffin and when the vault was open, everyone that was around for the burial of Thomas Chase was shocked, and they were shocked to find that for the very first time the coffins were completely in disarray. Like, none of them were in their place from before. They were not straight, they were not aligned, they were not neatly sitting on top of one another. They were completely in disarray. By the way, Thomas Chase was apparently not a very well-liked man. He was one of the most hated men, in fact, in Barbados. Why? Who knows? Maybe, again, it has to do with the deal of him having great wealth. Generally, anybody that has great wealth probably makes a lot of enemies doing so, and whenever that happens, there's a lot of animosity between people in that area. So he was not a very popular person. So surprisingly, maybe that's why there were a lot of people there at his funeral, because they were happy to see this guy go. But yeah, that's what happened. They opened up that Chase vault, that Chase family vault, and inside they found all these coffins in disarray. Naturally, the vault was examined. They were trying to see and make sure that there was something proving why those coffins were completely a mess, but no proof was found as to any grave robbers. But eventually, though, the idea became, and the solution became, it had to be grave robbers. There was nothing else plausible that could cause this particular disarray. So anything involving that first instance, it was just dismissed as having been grave robbers, and in that case, Thomas Chase was placed back into, he was placed into the vault. The coffins were placed back into their own neat order, and then it was left at that. Cut to a few years later. This is now 1816, so 4 years after Thomas Chase died. There was an 11-year-old from the family by the name of Charles Brewster Ames, and he died. And when that happened and the vault was opened, sure enough, second time around, it's back. The entire place, all the coffins were out of place yet again, including Thomas Chase's vault, and his was reported to have weighed 240 pounds. Not an easy thing to do. You would have to have a group of men or a group of people have to move his coffin in and around in order to accomplish what they found. Very fascinating stuff. By this point, people were trying to, again, see what was happening, what was going on with these coffins. They could not answer anything. Maybe they thought at that point it's grave robbers yet again. But the interesting part was there was nothing. There was nothing in terms of, let's say, looting. There wasn't any kind of place, anything involving, let's say, the coffins being thrown open and items being grabbed. And in fact, there was still, to that point, a gigantic rock slab cemented right in front of the vault, probably to prevent entry from grave robbers. And there it was. Each time the vault was being opened, that gigantic rock slab had to be chipped away, and it had to be opened in a very unorthodox manner to ensure that the vault was truly opened. But there they were, including Thomas's own coffin, 240 pounds. It was all in disarray. So yet again, the vault was placed back in order, all the coffins placed back in order, and then it was resealed just as it was before. Something happens with this family. Apparently, they have a lot of family members that were dying around that time, because only 52 days later, another member of the family died, a gentleman by the name of Samuel Brewster. And this time, at this point, there was a huge crowd that was beginning to gather at that vault, because by that point, this news spread around like wildfire. Everybody was aware of what was happening. Everybody wanted to be there, not necessarily for poor Samuel Brewster's funeral, but more for proof of what was going on. So they removed that giant slab of stone, and they carefully checked before doing so to make sure nothing was detecting an entry into that vault. Nothing was found. Like, there was no chipping away or drilling or anything involving breaking, nothing along those lines. Everything was perfectly as before. And yet again, when they opened the vault, everything was in disarray. But in this point, there was an interesting thing to note. The Mrs. Goddard's coffin, the very first one that started it all, her coffin was badly damaged. Everyone else's coffin, while in disarray, was not. This was the first time that a coffin itself was completely damaged. It was to the point where wire had to be brought in. I don't know if it was barbed wire or some kind of other wire, but it had to be brought in and purposefully wrapped around Mrs. Goddard's coffin to prevent it from, I guess, falling apart. So how creepy is that? Something at this point was purposefully moving these coffins, and it targeted Mrs. Goddard's coffin. Again, hers was badly damaged, and all the other ones were left untouched, except, of course, being moved, but they were untouched physically. So something was purposely angry at Mrs. Goddard's coffin. How creepy is that? Something that was there, invisible, something, whatever, paranormal, supernatural, whatever it could be, that was entering these vaults, this time decided to pick on hers and only on hers, which shows an intelligent force. They even brought in a reverend by the name of Thomas Oderson. He examined the vault. He could not find any single thing that could cause this. I don't know if he was looking at stuff pointing to like supernatural instances, paranormal instances, religious instances, who knows, but he was not able to find anything at all. So yet again, this vault was completely cleaned, it was completely sealed, it was wrapped, and it was left as is. Cut to the next death. This happened about 3 years later in 1819. Someone else was dying at that point. And when that happened, the vault was opened, and to no one's surprise, they found the coffins yet again in disarray. And by this point, with all the ruckus that was happening, the governor of that island, a gentleman by the name of Lord Combermere, I hope I'm saying his name right, Lord Combermere, he had enough. He ordered his own investigation into the matter. He would not have this kind of ruckus, this kind of publicity, whatever was happening, whatever was making a fool of them, happen yet again. So what they did is they looked over the entire vault, they checked everything. Again, they found that nothing was showing, no footprints, no chipping away the stones, no breaking of anything, no sign of any kind of access for any kind of perpetrators. But it wasn't enough for him. Apparently, he ordered, after the investigation was done, like the vault area to be completely, I guess you could call it, like wrapped, whatever it was. So he did something involving the vaults having been sealed, and then also having like an extra form of seal around it. He wanted to make sure that nothing could absolutely change what was happening inside that vault, because that was it. I mean, they were having enough. They did not want to have anything else cause much more ruckus. And yet, curiously enough, it was in 1820, a year later, and when they went to examine the vault, maybe they wanted to check on it a year later. Nobody had died. There was no news of anybody dying in 1820, but it looks like the governor wanted to make sure that anything involving this vault was remaining untouched. They found the seal, whatever it was that was wrapped around the vault, to be unbroken, which was good. So they broke it themselves. They opened the vault, and when they did, yet again, they found that the coffins were completely in disarray. This time also, some of them were completely flipped upside down. I mean, again, these are coffins that are several hundred pounds each. They were flipped upside down. There were no footprints. There was nothing that would show the work of somebody being there at that vault doing all this ruckus, while the seal on the outside, the one that the governor and his team placed, again, I don't know what that seal was, what it contained, but it was supposed to be foolproof, tamper-proof. But yet it wasn't enough. The vault was yet again in disarray, and everything was turned upside down. Crazy stuff. And finally, the governor said he had enough. The coffins were removed from the vault. They were buried someplace else on the island, and then that was it. That was the end of the urban legend. There was no further reports of anything involving where their new locations were, of having those coffins disturbed in any such manner. So something happened with regards to that location. Could it be tied to Thomas Chase's burial, starting everything? Because again, once he died and the vault was opened at his burial, that's when they found the previous coffins all in disarray, not before. Whenever all the previous, I think it was 3 or 4 burials were happening, nothing was in disarray. It was only when Thomas Chase, the patriarch, the man who was again very much hated by his daughter and by the society there in Barbados, once that happened, that's when the coffin disaster started occurring. Everybody has also ruled out anything involving water potentially causing the damage, because there would be proof along the lines of, let's say, water damage inside the vault, water damage to the wooden coffins, stuff like that. Also, what was ruled out, another natural thought, was earthquakes. What about earthquakes? Surely earthquakes could cause something involving things moving underneath ground, sure, but it would fail to point out why only that vault had an earthquake inside of it, because nothing else surrounding the other coffins, nothing else surrounding the other parts of the cemetery there were affected. So the idea of having an earthquake would involve having an earthquake so centralized, so localized, it would have to occur right there at that vault. So pretty freaky stuff. That only leaves several other explanations, and those all involve anything involving, let's say, paranormal, supernatural type stuff, or anything else. So pretty freaky. What do you guys think? The Moving Coffins of Barbados. Has anyone else heard this particular urban legend? Anyone else have any other tales tied to it, stories? Anybody from the Barbados location? Please post your comments, share them below. It'd be fascinating to hear and see any other input tied to it. Great suggestion, great urban legend. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care.